Welcome back to our Acts Bible study. Today we are looking at part of Acts chapter 2, just verses 1 through 21, which is the story of Pentecost. So here it is. When Pentecost Day arrived, they were all together in one place. Suddenly, a sound from heaven like the howling of a fierce wind filled the entire house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be individual flames of fire alighting on each one of them. They were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit enabled them to speak. There were pious Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem. When they heard this sound, a crowd gathered. They were mystified because everyone heard them speaking in their native languages. They were surprised and amazed, saying, "Look, aren't all the people who are speaking Galileans, every one of them? How then can each of us hear them speaking in our native language?" Parthians, Medes, and Elamites, as well as residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt and the regions of Libya bordering Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and converts to Judaism, Cretans and Arabs, we hear them declaring the mighty works of God in our own languages. They were all surprised and bewildered. Some asked each other, "What does this mean?" Others jeered at them, saying, "They're full of new wine." Peter stood with the other 11 apostles. He raised his voice and declared, "Judeans and everyone living in Jerusalem, know this. Listen carefully to my words. These people aren't drunk, as you suspect. After all, it's only 9 o'clock in the morning. Rather, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young will see visions. Your elders will dream dreams. Even upon my servants, men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. I will cause wonders to occur in the heavens above and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and a cloud of smoke. The sun will be changed into darkness, and the moon will be changed into blood, before the great and spectacular day of the Lord comes. And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." Thanks for joining us for week 2 of our Acts Bible study. If you didn't see week 1 yet about Acts chapter 1, then find that video on our YouTube channel as well. And so in chapter 1, we talked about Jesus' ascension into heaven, which happened 40 days after the resurrection. And in chapter 2 here, we have the story of Pentecost, which is 50 days after the resurrection. So the disciples, the apostles, have been together, have been waiting for the Holy Spirit, the promised gift of the Father. And they've been gathered together in Jerusalem waiting. And then here in this reading, which verses 1 through 21 is the reading that we normally hear on Pentecost, which usually happens in May or June because it's 50 days after Easter. And so they've gathered in Jerusalem, and all of a sudden the Holy Spirit comes in and disrupts their gathering, and they see individual flames of fire on each of them. You hopefully looked at the little picture, the painting from, I think that's from a chapel that was in Assisi, where St. Francis is from. And they are suddenly enabled to share the news of God's mighty deeds with people who are gathered in Jerusalem for the festival of Pentecost, which was a Jewish festival, and who would not all have been able to understand everyone. Now, what's interesting is to note that some of the people in that long list of groups that could suddenly hear these Galileans telling of God's mighty deeds are not people that would have been gathered in Jerusalem at that time. Instead, like the Hittites actually are people that are mentioned in the Old Testament. So the writer of Acts is making this a big deal, maybe exaggerating a little, but making this a moment that's like, this is something serious in the life of this new movement of people following Jesus. This is a collection of people moving forward of what God is doing in the world through the work of the Holy Spirit, and it's a big deal. So, in the church today, we often call it the birthday of the church, and we think of it as this new beginning because the apostles begin in very real ways to share and make disciples of the whole world, right? All of a sudden, people from all over the place are hearing about God's mighty deeds. So the apostles are living out this commission that Christ gave them before he ascended. And then the book of Acts, of course, continues that story throughout, and we continue that story today. It has a beginning and it doesn't have an end because God's mighty deeds are still happening, and our job as the church is to continue to tell people the mighty deeds of God from way back when and also right now. So this is an exciting moment in the book of Acts. It's also a difficult moment. Obviously, there are people who don't understand what's going on and don't believe that it could be real. But Peter gets up and gives them a speech. When we end at verse 21, we don't actually read all of Peter's speech, so take some time to read all of Acts chapter 2 and see what else he has to say, because he also is letting them know, what part of what you need to know and understand is the way that Jesus was treated and about his crucifixion and his resurrection, and how the Jewish authorities have not always been favorable toward this new movement of God in the world. So Peter gives that speech, and then the end of chapter 2 tells us that the believers had everything together, that they spent time worshiping, praying, eating, and just sharing together, and that I think 3,000 people were added to the church that day. And then throughout the book of Acts, the writer tells us again and again, sometimes just by numbers, sometimes by saying many people were added to the church that day, but this sense of it's growing in leaps and bounds, new things are happening, and the Holy Spirit is at work. So this is, like I said, it's a beginning, and we are a continuation of this story of Pentecost. So it's a really exciting moment in the life of the church. I'm sure it was a very surprising, maybe even disconcerting moment in the life of the apostles. But we celebrate that we all have this job, this commission to go out into the world and make disciples of others by proclaiming God's mighty deeds, and also that the Holy Spirit gives us the power to do that. We're not doing it on our own. We have the Spirit with us. So I hope that you will take some time to look at Acts chapter 2, maybe look up some of those people that are on that list: Cretans and Arabs, Hittites, Medes, Parthians, Elamites, all those people. Learn something more about who probably was and also probably wasn't gathered in Jerusalem at the same period of time. But also think about how exciting that is. What a wonderful thing it is to be like, hey, all these people suddenly heard about God's mighty deeds, and then also get excited about the ways that we are also called to share that. So that's our study for Acts chapter 2, or just part of it, and we'll be back next Friday for more on the book of Acts. If you would like to be involved, you're welcome to record yourself asking a question, reading part of the book of Acts, or just giving some of your thoughts on it. Or if you don't want to record yourself, but you still have a question or a comment, you can send that to me as well. You can email things to me at betzy@eiuwesley.org, and I will be glad to incorporate that in next week or another week's video Bible study on Acts. Thanks for joining, and we'll be back here next week. Bye!